The board up here, if I can call it that, has a quotation out of the New York Times of a few years ago, which said something that's been said by many others in many different ways, that we're in the critical stage of cultural change called a change of age. A change of age doesn't occur very often. The last one was called the Renaissance, and that was 400 years ago. But it seems apparent to those who reflect on these things that shortly after World War II, we began to go through cultural transformations that constitute a change of age. Now, that change involves a lot of other contributory changes, but the most important of which is that our way of thinking changes. That was recognized perhaps most acutely and with greatest brevity by Einstein when he made this famous statement that you can't solve the problems created by our current pattern of thought using our current pattern of thought. The interesting thing about this quotation is I've never found a manager or a professional who disagreed with this statement, but I found damn few that ever knew what it meant. It's very easy to agree with something the meaning of which is completely vague. In the Renaissance, when science as we know it today was born, naturally they had to have a way of inquiry that you can call the scientific method. It's a method of inquiry which comes perfectly naturally to us. You can see it today in a child. If you take a child, not an infant, somebody between 2 and 5 years old, and give them an object they've never seen before, and leave them alone with it, and they're curious, what process will they go through? Well, it's a 3-step process, and not surprisingly, it's called analysis. First thing you do is take it apart. Then you try to understand what the parts do. And then finally assemble the understanding of the parts into an understanding of the whole. Our entire culture is built on analytical thinking. If you go to a university to study any subject, say business, you don't take courses in business. Business is broken down into its parts: production, marketing, finance, personnel. And you study each of the parts, and the assumption is that when you know the parts taken separately, you'll be able to integrate that knowledge into an understanding of the whole. That's analytical thinking. Now, analysis permeated all of our institutions. It permeates corporations. How do you run a corporation? You divide it into parts, either functionally or by product or by geography. Then you arrange to run each part, and then you try to aggregate or integrate the running of the parts into a running of the whole. It's an analytical process. Organizational structure is a complete reflection of analysis, just as a university structure is. Every subject is broken up into pieces, and the studies that are conducted are the studies of the part, hopefully leaving the student or somebody to help them synthesize the parts at the end into an understanding of the whole. Now, all of this started to get us into trouble in the 1950s for an interesting reason. A German biologist by the name of Ludwig von Bertalanffy migrated from Germany to Canada because of persecution of Hitler. And when he got there, he took a number of the articles he had written in German and translated them into English and put them into a book. The book appeared in 1954, and the book itself was not so important. But the concept on which he focused turned out to be incredibly important. The book was called General Systems Theory, and it was a concept system which was essentially the camel that broke the back of the previous era. How and why requires that we understand what a system is and why the problems of analysis cannot answer critical questions about systems. See, take an automobile, for example, which is a simple mechanical system that you're all familiar with. Why is the motor in front? Well, you probably know the reason, because it was originally called the horseless carriage. And therefore, the motor was put where the horse was, in the front of the cart, right? But you think that somebody who didn't know that would find out by taking the automobile apart? Well, let's see. The automobile was originally a 6-passenger vehicle. Why? Why wasn't it 5, 4, 15, 9? Why was it 6? Will taking it apart tell you? Of course not. How many of you ever been to Britain, England? You know they drive on the wrong side of the road. Why? Do you think taking British cars apart is going to tell you why they drive on the left and we drive on the right? Of course not. What we began to understand is that why questions about objects called systems cannot be answered by the use of analysis. Now, answers to why questions are called explanations, and the product of explanations is understanding. And what we became aware of in the 1950s was science produces no understanding, it produces knowledge. Because the product of analysis is how things work, never why they work the way they do. We needed a new way of thinking to provide explanation and therefore understanding. Explanations always lie outside the system, never inside it. Analysis takes you into the system and how it works. It provides knowledge, but not understanding. We need another way of thinking, which not surprisingly is called synthesis, that provides explanations of the behavior of a system. Synthetic thinking consists of 3 steps, which are exactly the opposite of analysis, each one. In the first step of analysis, you take whatever it is that you want to understand, you take it apart. The first step of synthesis, you take the thing you want to understand and say, what is this a part of? You identify a containing whole of which this is a part. So if I want to understand an automobile, I say it's a part of the transportation system first. When I understand the university, it's a part of the educational system. The corporation is a part of the economic system, and so on. In the second step of analysis, I try to identify the properties and behavior of the parts taken separately. The second step of synthesis, I try to explain the behavior of the containing whole. What's the educational system? What's the transportation system? In the third step of synthesis, I try to aggregate understanding of the parts into an understanding of the whole. In the third step of synthetic thinking, I disaggregate the understanding of the containing whole by identifying the role or function of what I'm trying to explain in that whole. A system is a whole, spelled with a W, that's defined by its function in a larger system of which it's a part. Every system is contained in a larger system, and its role or function in that system is what defines it. So if you take the automobile, coming back to that again, it's defined by the fact that it's an instrument for carrying people from one place to another on the ground, under their control and in privacy. So you describe its function, what it does. You don't describe how it does it. If you want to define a computer, you don't talk about how it works, you talk about what it does, what functions it performs, data processing, calculation, and so on. All systems are parts of larger systems. Every system, then, is defined by its function in a larger system. In order to perform that function, it requires essential parts. These are parts which are necessary for the performance of the function, but not sufficient. So, for example, the motor is necessary for an automobile. It can't run without a motor. It doesn't need a windshield wiper to run. It doesn't need a door handle, doesn't need a cigarette lighter or rugs on the floor. But the motor, the battery, the fuel pump are all essential. Well, that means then that an essential property of a system is that it cannot be divided into independent parts. That its properties derive out of the interaction of its parts and not the actions of its parts taken separately. Therefore, if we apply analysis to a system, what's the first thing you do? Take it apart. But when you take it apart, what happens? It loses all of its essential properties, and so do its parts. You see, if we brought an automobile in here, it's big enough to take one, and disassembled it and kept every part in this room, we would not have an automobile. We have the parts of an automobile. A system is never the sum of its parts. It's the product of their interactions. So when I take a car apart, it's no longer an automobile. But even more critical is the fact that the motor, which is necessary to move a car, when removed from the car, it can't move anything, including itself. It just sits there. You cannot think without a brain. But if a surgeon removes your brain and puts it on a table, it doesn't sit there and think. It's necessary for your thinking. You think, the brain does not think. And when it's separated from the system of which it's a part, it loses its essential function as an instrument for producing thought. Now, think of the implications of that simple property of a system to start with. You go to a business school to learn how to manage and organize activity, and you look at the course structure. What are the courses on? They're on the parts of a business taken separate. So you study marketing as a separate subject, production is a separate subject, finance is a separate subject, and so on. The net result is at the end of a business school, you have no understanding of what a business is, and not even an understanding of the parts. Because you can't study the motor of an automobile independently of the way it interacts with other parts. You can't study production independently of how it interacts with marketing, finance, and personnel, and so on. But the way universities are structured, these are silos of inquiry where each one claims complete autonomy and independence of the others. And to the extent that they succeed, they emasculate the subject, take all of the content out of it.
In many cases, we're making the performance of the part worse will improve the performance of the whole. But I've never seen a manager who acknowledges that. But there's one profession that knows it intimately, and that's the architect. See, I used to be an architect. That's where I started before I was saved. And I was working in an office when the first opportunity I had to design a house came about. My family came in. They had bought a lot out in the country. It was a beautiful lot in a heavily wooded area on the side of the hill, leading to a ravine and a lake. It was just beautiful. They said, we want to build a two-story house into the side of the hill, enter from the upper level, where we'll have the living quarters, and down below we'll have the other stuff, that we can get out at the lower level of the hill. Upstairs, we want 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. We want a powder room, a utility room for the laundry, a living dining room and kitchen, only one big open area, separated functions, but open area. Down below, we want a large room for the kids to play in or the whole party. We want a work room, an office where the master of the house can double as a guest room with a bath. A utility room for the furnace and air conditioner. We want a 2-car garage with a workshop at the back end of it. We want it to be contemporary architecture built out of wood so it blends in with the forest. This is how much we would like to spend. I said, give me a week and I'll have some sketches for you. Come back. Have you ever watched an architect work? Well, it's interesting because you learn a lot by doing it. What does he do? Does he draw a picture of the rooms and say, how do I put them together into a house? Would you guess that's what he does? What does he do? He draws the house first. Got no parts. He draws a picture of the whole without parts. Now he has a conception of the whole, and he puts rooms in. Then he looks at the rooms. Boy, this bedroom is terrible. It comes out, it's too long and narrow. It's not a comfortable room, and it doesn't have cross ventilation. So I'm going to have to change the room to improve it. But now he employs the systems principle. I will only improve the room in a way which improves the house. If I can make the room worse and make the house better, I will do it. Because the objective is to build the best house, not to build the best room. Now you say that's good academically, but it doesn't happen in practice. Well, sure as hell does. And I'm going to give you an example because it happened in that house. After the design was completed and the family was happy with it, we let it out for bids, got a contract, and they we're ready to build it when the housewife called me one day. She said, Russ, I can't wait till we move into that house. I just love it. But there's one part that really worries me. He said, the playroom and the party room is down below the kitchen. And I'm going to be running up and down the stairs all the time, carrying drinks and hors d'oeuvres or cookies for the kids or breaking up fights, but I'm going to be up and down the stairs all the time. Can't we put a dumbwaiter in? You all know what a dumbwaiter is. You should put a dumbwaiter in. But the only way you can do it is by taking counter space away from the kitchen. That will make the kitchen harder to work in. She said, I don't care, I want a dumbwaiter. She got it. And look what she did. She made the kitchen work, but the house a lot better. Now, even management that doesn't recognize that they do this occasionally. What's a loss leader? Every supermarket has loss leaders. There were studies done several years ago. They found that housewives on the average only know the price of 6 products. They think they know the price of everything, but they only know the price really of 6. Including bread, milk, baby food, and stuff like that. So the supermarket will literally sell those products at the low cost to get the housewife in who will then buy the profitable product. That's sacrificing a part for the performance of the whole. That's the consequence of systemic thinking, of focusing on the effect of changing parts on the whole. How would you have ever heard of a manager of a unit in a company telling one of the sub-units, next year we want you to perform less well because of the whole? It's never been. And the corporation is always, we want you to behave as well as possible. The trouble is when every part behaves as well as possible, you may destroy the corporation. Now that's easy to see, it can be proved rigorously, but if you took the 457 different automobiles available in the United States and tested them to see which one had the best motor, I suspect the Rolls-Royce would come out of the best. Now try the transmission, probably be the Mercedes. Then try the fuel pump, well maybe it's the Lincoln. And you take every essential part of an automobile, find out which is the best one available. When that list is complete, take those parts off those cars and put them together into the best possible automobile. It consists of all the best parts, the Rolls-Royce motor, the Mercedes transmission, the Lincoln fuel pump, and so on. Will you get the best car? You won't even get a car. Why? The parts don't fit. The performance of the system depends on how the parts interact, never on how they act taken separately. So the fundamental thing that management in the new age must learn is how the parts of the system they manage interact, not on how they act taken separately. And business schools have to teach interactions, not actions. Not how marketing works, but how marketing interacts with finance and personnel and production. That's what's critical. And you see that particularly in the next point. This is always a shocker. There isn't any such thing as a production problem, or a marketing problem, or a financial problem, or a philosophical problem, or a religious problem, or a health problem, or a social problem. There are no such things. Those adjectives in front of the word problem tell you something, but they don't tell you a damn thing about a problem. They tell you about something, but not about the problem. And the significance of that is tremendous. Let me get at it indirectly by using a medical analogy for the moment. How many of you have never had a headache? Good. Nobody. You just had a headache. Wonderful. You're the first person in 2 days to say that. Right. The rest of you who have had such an experience, how do you usually handle it? By brain surgery? Of course you don't do it by brain surgery. Why? Because you take a pill, like aspirin or something like that. It contains a chemical. You swallow it, goes in the stomach where it dissolves the chemical, enters the bloodstream, and is carried to the pain center of the brain, and deposited there, and the thing goes away. Because somebody understands the way the parts of biology, the biological system operates, it knows that the place to attack a problem is not necessarily where the problem appears. So it's a hell of a lot better to treat a headache by taking a pill than by doing brain surgery. But in a corporation, we always do brain surgery. See, the marketing manager comes in the morning, he says, sales are going to hell in New England in the last quarter. I got a marketing problem. And now he tries to solve the problem by manipulating marketing variables. But the fact is that over 90% of the problems that arise in the corporation are better solved somewhere other than where they appear. But you can only find it through an understanding of the interaction.